It is late now, and the world outside your window has gone quiet, and somewhere far away in the folds of history, there were people who lived entire lives filled with strange and unsettling routines that they never once questioned, because for them, these routines were simply what it meant to wake up each morning and survive another day. And tonight, we are going to walk slowly through some of the strangest and most disturbing daily habits that ordinary people carried out without a second thought, habits involving the cleaning of teeth, the eating of small animals as medicine, and the quiet keeping of venomous snakes inside the very rooms where families slept. And as your eyes grow heavy and your body sinks deeper into the softness beneath you, let history carry you gently away from tonight into a place where the past becomes a soft blur of candlelight and stone corridors, and half-remembered voices speaking in languages that no longer exist. And you do not need to remember any of what you hear tonight. You only need to listen and let your mind loosen its grip on the present moment, because there is nowhere you need to be and nothing you need to do except rest. And in ancient Egypt, long before toothbrushes or toothpaste existed in any form, people faced the same problem every human being has faced since the beginning of time, which was the slow decay of the mouth caused by food particles, sugar from dates and honey, and the simple passage of years. And archaeologists digging through the sands near the Nile discovered small wooden sticks frayed at one end, almost like a tiny brush, and these were called chew sticks. And they were made from the twigs of trees, such as the arak tree, which contained natural cleansing compounds, and a person would take one end of the stick and chew it slowly until the fibers separated and softened into something resembling bristles, and then they would rub this frayed end across their teeth and gums in slow circular motions, and this was repeated daily by farmers and priests and pharaohs alike, because dental pain in ancient Egypt was not something that could simply be treated with a quick trip to a clinic. It was something that could end a person's ability to eat properly for the rest of their life. And beyond the simple chew stick, the ancient Egyptians also created something that closely resembles a toothpaste. And this paste has been reconstructed by modern researchers who found the recipe written on a papyrus dating back nearly 2,000 years. And the recipe called for a mixture of rock salt, crushed dried iris, flowers, dried mint, and grains of pepper, all of them ground together into a fine, gritty powder. And this powder would have tasted sharp and bitter and slightly burning against the gums. And when researchers in recent years actually recreated this ancient toothpaste and tested it on volunteers, many of them reported that their gums bled slightly during the first use because the abrasive salt was harsh against soft tissue. But after repeated use, the volunteers described a strange, tingling freshness that lingered in the mouth for hours. And it is worth pausing here to imagine what it must have felt like to be an ordinary Egyptian farmer waking before dawn, dipping a frayed twig into a small clay dish of this sharp, salty powder and scrubbing their teeth in the dim orange light of an oil lamp before heading out to the fields. And the smell of crushed iris and pepper would have mixed with wood smoke and river mist in the cool morning air. And there would have been no mirror to check their reflection, only the dull metallic taste in their mouth as confirmation that the ritual was complete. And across the sea in ancient Rome, the approach to dental hygiene took a far more unsettling turn, because the Romans discovered quite by accident that urine contains a compound called ammonia. And ammonia happens to be remarkably effective at breaking down stains and whitening teeth. And so wealthy Romans and even some of the poorer citizens began collecting urine specifically for the purpose of oral hygiene. And in the busiest cities, such as Rome itself, there existed large communal vessels placed on street corners specifically so that passersby could relieve themselves into them. And this urine was not simply discarded. It was collected by merchants who would then sell it in smaller jars to be used both for cleaning laundry and for rinsing the mouth. And there are surviving Roman writings mocking a particular group of people from the Iberian Peninsula for having unusually white and bright teeth, and the joke among Roman writers was that these people brushed their teeth with their own urine every single morning as a matter of routine, and this was not considered a shameful secret. It was simply understood as an effective method, and some wealthier Romans would even import a stronger, more concentrated form of aged urine from Portugal, believing it to be more potent than local urine, and they would pay considerable sums of money for small jars of this imported liquid and use it mixed with crushed pumice stone to scrub their teeth until they gleamed. And imagine for a moment a Roman senator standing in his private bathhouse before an important meeting in the forum, dipping a soft cloth into a small jar of aged imported urine and carefully working it across his front teeth, checking his reflection in a small, polished bronze mirror and adjusting his toga while the sharp ammonia scent lingered faintly on his breath. And to him, this was simply what it meant to look presentable, to look successful, to look like a man of status, and the poorer citizens of Rome could not afford imported urine, and so they used whatever was locally available, often collecting their own each morning in small clay pots kept beside their beds and rinsing their mouths before stepping out into the crowded streets. And this practice continued for centuries, and it was not until much later in history that European dentists began to understand that ammonia, while effective at whitening, could also slowly erode the protective enamel of the teeth over time, leaving them more vulnerable to decay in the long run. And so the very practice that gave Romans their famously bright smiles may have quietly been destroying their teeth from the inside with every single use, and moving further north into the cold, damp world of medieval Europe. The approach to dental care became far less scientific and far more entangled with superstition and folk belief, and in medieval villages across England, France, and Germany, people did not generally believe that decayed teeth were caused by bacteria or food particles, because the concept of bacteria simply did not exist yet in the medieval mind, and instead, many believed that tooth pain was caused by a tiny worm that lived inside the tooth itself, slowly gnawing away at the interior. And this belief was so widespread that traveling barbers and so-called tooth drawers would perform elaborate rituals in the town square, pretending to extract small worms from a patient's mouth after pulling a rotten tooth. And they would secretly hide a small worm or maggot in their hand beforehand, and then present it to the gathered crowd as proof that they had successfully removed the creature, causing the pain in the patient whose tooth had just been violently pulled with crude iron tools would nod in relief, believing the worm was now gone, and the crowd watching would applaud and pay the barber for his skill. And for basic daily cleaning, medieval peasants often used a simple cloth dipped in salt water, rubbed roughly across the teeth and gums, and wealthier households sometimes used a mixture of vinegar and crushed herbs such as sage and rosemary, believing these herbs had cleansing and breath-freshening properties. And there are old European household manuscripts that recommend rubbing burnt rosemary ash directly onto the teeth using a finger or a small cloth. And this ash would have tasted intensely bitter and left a gray residue across the enamel, but it was believed to whiten and strengthen the teeth. And in monasteries where monks spent long hours copying manuscripts by candlelight, there are records of communal tooth cleaning rituals performed before morning prayers using a shared cloth, and a small bowl of salted water passed quietly from monk to monk in the dim stone chapel, and travel further east into the Islamic world during this same medieval period, and you find a strikingly different and far more advanced approach to oral hygiene, because the widespread use of a twig called the miswak became not just common, but religiously encouraged. And the miswak is a small stick taken from the Salvadora persica tree, and it naturally contains antibacterial compounds, and when chewed, the end of the stick softens into a natural brush, and Islamic scholars and physicians during the medieval period wrote extensively about the health benefits of regular miswak use, recommending it before each of the 5 daily prayers. And this meant that a devout Muslim living in Baghdad or Cairo or Cordoba during this era might clean their teeth 5 separate times throughout the day, far more frequently than almost anyone else living anywhere else in the world at that time. And physicians in these regions also developed early forms of dental instruments. And some of the most detailed surviving medical texts on oral surgery and tooth extraction come from Islamic scholars of this period who studied anatomy far more rigorously than their European counterparts. And meanwhile, on the other side of the world in ancient China, a different but equally sophisticated tradition was developing, and Chinese physicians as early as the Tang Dynasty were experimenting, with early bristle toothbrushes made from the coarse hair found on the back of a pig's neck. And these bristles were trimmed and attached to a small bone or bamboo handle. And this design closely resembles the modern toothbrush we still use today. And Chinese medical texts from this period also describe elaborate herbal tooth powders made from ground ginseng, salt, and various medicinal herbs believed to strengthen the gums and freshen the breath. And wealthy households in ancient China would keep small lacquered boxes containing these tooth powders on their bedside tables. And it was considered a mark of refinement and discipline to maintain clean, bright teeth. And now let us drift slowly away from the subject of teeth and into something even stranger, something that will feel deeply unsettling to the modern mind. And that is the ancient and surprisingly widespread practice of eating small rodents and insects, not as an act of desperation during famine, but as an intentional and carefully prescribed form of medicine. Because across many ancient cultures, physicians believed that certain small animals contained properties that could cure specific ailments, and in ancient Rome, there existed a medical text attributed to the natural historian Pliny the Elder, which recommended a variety of remedies involving mice, and among these remedies was a treatment for whooping cough in children, which involved cutting open a live field mouse and applying its warm insides directly to the chest of the coughing child. And this was believed to draw the illness out of the body and transfer it into the small animal instead. And there were also remedies involving the ashes of a burned mouse mixed with honey, which parents would feed to children suffering from bedwetting, believing that the properties of the mouse, which nested quietly and rarely soiled its own burrow, would somehow transfer this same cleanliness and control to the child. And Roman soldiers on long campaigns, far from proper medical supplies, would sometimes eat roasted mice as a source of protein, and there are surviving accounts describing mice as an emergency ration during long sieges when regular food supplies had run dangerously low. And in ancient Egypt, medical papyri contain remedies that involve applying the body of a mouse directly to wounds and infections, believing the small creature would absorb the sickness from the human body as it decayed. And there is one particularly detailed Egyptian remedy for toothache, which instructs the healer to place the body of a dead mouse directly against the aching tooth and gum and leave it there for a period of time. And modern historians reading these ancient texts have noted with some discomfort that this practice likely did nothing medically beneficial and may have introduced dangerous bacteria directly into open wounds. But at the time, it was considered a legitimate and respected medical treatment performed by trained physicians, not by desperate peasants. And moving into medieval Europe, the eating and use of mice for medicinal purposes continued in various forms. And there are English folk remedies recorded well into the 17th century, which recommend feeding a child a pie containing baked mice as a cure for bedwetting. And this remedy persisted stubbornly in rural communities long after formal medicine had begun to move toward more scientific approaches, and mothers in isolated villages would prepare these small pies specifically for children who struggled with nighttime accidents, believing wholeheartedly in the treatment because it had been passed down from their own mothers and grandmothers. And there are also medieval European remedies involving crushed, dried mice mixed into drinks intended to treat measles and smallpox, and physicians of the era genuinely believed that consuming the animal would help draw the disease's rash and fever out of the patient's body. And beyond mice, many ancient and medieval cultures also consumed insects as a regular part of both diet and medicine, and in ancient Greece. There are writings describing the consumption of cicadas, which were considered a delicacy and were eaten roasted and lightly salted. And Aristotle himself wrote about the best time to harvest cicadas for eating, noting that the females were considered more flavorful once filled with eggs, and in various regions of ancient China, grasshoppers and silkworm larvae were both eaten as food and used in traditional medicine, with silkworm pupae believed to strengthen the lungs and improve circulation when consumed regularly. And these practices were not considered strange or shameful within their own cultural context. They were simply part of the accepted medical and culinary knowledge of the time, passed down through generations of physicians and healers and mothers preparing meals for their families. And it is only when we look back at these practices through modern eyes, accustomed to sterile pharmacies and laboratory-tested medicine, that they begin to feel so deeply unsettling and strange. And now let your mind drift once more, this time toward something that lived quietly in the shadows of ancient homes and temples, something that most people today would never willingly allow near their own bed, and that is the snake. Because across a remarkable number of ancient cultures spanning different continents and different centuries, snakes were not simply feared as dangerous predators. They were also respected, honored, and in many cases deliberately kept close to human dwellings and sacred spaces for the purposes of protection, healing, and spiritual guidance. And in ancient Greece, the connection between snakes and healing was so deeply embedded in medical culture that it survives visually even into the modern world, because the symbol still used today to represent medicine, a single snake coiled around a staff, comes directly from the ancient Greek god of medicine and healing named Asclepius. And according to ancient Greek belief, Asclepius possessed the power to heal the sick and even raise the dead, and his healing temples, known as Asclepiae, were built throughout the Greek world, and these temples deliberately kept live non-venomous snakes freely moving throughout the sacred grounds, because it was believed that the snakes themselves possessed healing properties and were sacred vessels through which the god's power flowed, and sick pilgrims traveling from across the ancient Mediterranean world would arrive at these temples, often after long and exhausting journeys, and they would undergo a purification ritual involving fasting and bathing before being led into a large sleeping hall known as the abaton. And here the patient would lie down on a simple pallet on the stone floor in complete darkness, and the temple priests would allow the sacred snakes to move freely throughout the room during the night. And it was believed that if a snake slithered across or near a sleeping patient's body during this ritual, the god Asclepius himself was making direct contact with the patient, offering either healing or a prophetic dream revealing the cure for their illness. And imagine being that ancient pilgrim lying alone in complete darkness inside a stone chamber, having traveled for weeks specifically for this moment, and hearing the faint, dry whisper of scales moving slowly across the cold stone floor somewhere near your feet, and not knowing whether the creature approaching in the darkness was venomous or harmless, and having to trust completely in the ritual and in the priests who assured you that this was a moment of sacred healing rather than danger. And many patients reported vivid dreams during these nights inside the abaton dreams, in which the god Asclepius appeared to them directly, sometimes accompanied by a snake offering herbal remedies or surgical advice, and priests recorded these dreams the following morning and used them to prescribe treatments, believing the god had communicated the correct cure through the medium of sleep. And the snake in ancient Egypt held an equally powerful reverence for snakes, though their symbolism carried a somewhat different meaning, centered heavily on protection and royal authority. And the cobra goddess, known as Wadjet, was one of the most important protective deities in the entire Egyptian pantheon, and images of a rearing cobra called the uraeus were worn directly on the crowns of pharaohs, positioned at the center of the forehead. And this symbol was believed to spit fire and poison at any enemy who threatened the ruler, offering constant magical protection. And beyond royal symbolism, There is also evidence that some Egyptian households, particularly those involved in grain storage, deliberately tolerated and even encouraged the presence of certain non-venomous snakes, because these snakes helped control the population of rats and mice that would otherwise destroy stored grain supplies and a household. That kept a resident snake quietly living among their storage jars was in a very practical sense protecting their food supply and their family's survival through the winter months. And in ancient India, the reverence for snakes reached an extraordinary level of religious and cultural significance, particularly surrounding the cobra, which was worshipped as a powerful deity known as Naga. And to this day, there remains an annual Hindu festival called Nag Panchami, during which live cobras are worshipped and offered milk as devotees pray for protection and good fortune. And in ancient times, it was not uncommon for certain temples dedicated to snake worship to keep live cobras within the temple grounds cared for by dedicated priests known as snake charmers. And these individuals developed an intimate and dangerous relationship with venomous snakes, learning their behavior patterns so intricately that they could handle them with remarkable confidence. Though bites and fatalities certainly did occur throughout history, and rural Indian households in certain regions historically believed that a snake living quietly beneath the home or within the walls of a granary was a sign of good fortune and protection. And killing such a snake was considered deeply unlucky and spiritually dangerous, and so families would coexist with these hidden reptilian neighbors for years, often never directly encountering them, but always aware of their presence somewhere within the walls or beneath the floorboards. And in ancient Rome, beyond the more famous stories of Cleopatra and the asp, there is also evidence of household worship involving snakes, particularly connected to the Roman concept of the genius or guardian spirit of a household. And Roman homes sometimes featured wall paintings depicting a snake approaching a small household altar. And this snake was believed to represent the protective spirit of the family, and archaeologists excavating certain Roman villas have found evidence suggesting some households did keep tame snakes as a form of both practical pest control and spiritual protection. Much like the tradition in ancient Egypt and moving into medieval Europe, the relationship with snakes shifted dramatically, becoming far more fearful and superstitious, largely due to the influence of Christian religious symbolism, which associated the serpent directly with the devil and the biblical story of the fall of man in the Garden of Eden. And yet, even within this more fearful medieval context, there remained pockets of older folk belief that persisted quietly in rural communities and in certain regions of Germanic and Slavic Europe. There existed a folk belief in a creature known as the house snake, a small, harmless snake believed to live beneath the hearth or foundation of a home and bring good luck, prosperity, and protection to the family living above. And killing a house snake was considered to invite terrible misfortune upon the household, and elderly grandmothers in these rural villages would leave small offerings of milk near known snake holes, believing this would keep the household spirit content and continue its silent protection of the family. And children growing up in these villages were taught from a very young age never to disturb or harm the snake believed to live quietly beneath their own home. And so for centuries, in scattered corners of Europe, families slept each night directly above creatures they viewed, not as pests to be feared, but as silent guardians deserving of quiet respect and a small offering of milk left in the dark. And if you now imagine all of these traditions layered together across centuries and continents, you begin to see a strange and consistent pattern emerging from ancient civilization after ancient civilization, each one developing in complete isolation from the others, yet each one arriving independently at strikingly similar conclusions, cleaning teeth with whatever natural resource was available, whether a frayed twig or aged urine or an herbal ash treating illness with small animals, believed to absorb or transfer sickness away from the human body, and finally welcoming snakes not as terrifying invaders but as protective spiritual companions living quietly within the walls of temples and homes. And each of these practices, No matter how strange or unsettling they may seem tonight, represented something deeply human, which was the desire to feel a small sense of control over a world that was otherwise unpredictable, frightening, and largely beyond understanding. And every farmer scrubbing their teeth with salt and pepper before dawn, every mother preparing a mouse pie for her bedwetting child, every priest walking silently among sacred temple snakes was simply trying their very best to protect the people they loved using the only knowledge and tools available to them in their particular moment in history. And there was no internet to search for better answers, no laboratory to test their remedies, no scientific journal to consult, and there was only tradition passed quietly from one generation to the next through whispered instructions and careful demonstration. And as strange as these practices may sound to us now safe in our modern beds with modern medicine within easy reach, it is worth remembering that the people who lived through these centuries were not foolish or ignorant. They were doing exactly what every human being throughout history has always done, which is using whatever knowledge was available to them in their time to try to survive and to try to heal and to try to protect the people closest to them. And now, as your body continues to settle deeper into the softness beneath, you and your breathing slows and your thoughts begin to blur gently into one another. Let yourself imagine one final scene. An ancient household somewhere between Rome and Alexandria on a quiet night many centuries ago. And inside this small stone house, a family has just finished their evening meal, and the mother is gently pressing a cloth soaked in salted water against her youngest child's teeth as the little one yawns sleepily, and nearby the father checks quietly beneath a loose floor stone where he knows a small, harmless snake has made its home, believing it will keep the mice away from their stored grain through the coming winter. And in the corner, an old woman mutters a quiet blessing over a small clay jar of herbal tooth powder before setting it aside for the morning, and one by one, the family settles onto their sleeping mats as the single oil lamp flickers and dims, and outside the wind moves softly through the olive trees, and somewhere in the darkness beyond the walls, the world continues turning slowly, exactly as it always has and exactly as it always will. And there is nothing more for you to do tonight except rest, just as they did so many centuries ago, safe within the strange and comforting rituals of their own time. And now let the silence settle around you completely, and let sleep come slowly and gently and fully, just as it always eventually does. And before you drift completely away, let us continue a little further into the quiet corners of history that most people never think about, because there were entire civilizations on the other side of the world developing their own private rituals of teeth cleaning and animal medicine and snake reverence, completely unaware that similar habits were forming among people they would never meet. And in the great Aztec Empire of what is now central Mexico, priests and nobles cared deeply about the appearance and health of their teeth, and archaeologists studying Aztec and Maya skeletal remains have discovered something remarkable, which is that wealthy individuals sometimes had small holes carefully drilled into their front teeth using early stone tools, and into these holes they inserted tiny polished pieces of jade or pyrite or turquoise, creating a small permanent gemstone embedded directly into the smile. And this was an extraordinarily painful and delicate procedure performed without anesthesia by skilled artisans who understood exactly how deep to drill without damaging the inner pulp of the tooth, and a nobleman walking through the streets of Tenochtitlan with a small, glimmering jade stone embedded in. His front tooth would catch the sunlight with every smile, and this was considered the height of beauty and status. And for daily cleaning, ordinary Aztec citizens used a paste made from crushed charcoal, mixed with salt and various local herbs applied with a soft cloth or a chewed stick, very similar in principle to the methods used across the ocean in ancient Egypt, though developed in complete isolation. And far to the north, in the cold fjords of Scandinavia, archaeologists studying the skeletal remains of Viking age warriors made a discovery that puzzled researchers for years because a number of skulls recovered from Viking burial sites showed deliberate deep horizontal grooves filed into the front teeth, and historians now believe these grooves were carved intentionally, likely using a fine file possibly, filled with a colored pigment such as red ochre to make the markings stand out visibly. And while the exact purpose remains debated among historians, many believe these filed teeth served as a visible mark of identity, possibly signaling that the individual was a skilled warrior or a member of a specific trading guild. And imagine sitting beside a small fire in a Viking longhouse while an elder carefully works a rough stone file back and forth across your front teeth, creating a permanent, painful mark that will identify you for the rest of your life, every time you speak or smile. And Vikings also cared surprisingly deeply about personal grooming. More broadly, and archaeological digs in Viking settlements have uncovered a large number of finely crafted combs, tweezers, and ear-cleaning tools, suggesting a level of personal hygiene that contradicts the popular modern image of Vikings as dirty and unwashed raiders. And in feudal Japan, a particularly striking dental practice developed among noblewomen and later spread more broadly through certain social classes. And this practice was known as ohaguro, which involved deliberately dyeing the teeth a deep glossy black using a solution made from fermented iron. Filings soaked in vinegar or tea combined with tannin-rich ingredients such as gallnuts. And this solution had to be reapplied every few days because it would gradually fade. And the process of applying it produced an extremely strong and unpleasant odor that lingered in the room for hours. And yet for centuries in Japan, a set of perfectly blackened teeth was considered deeply elegant and attractive, particularly among married women for whom it signaled maturity, commitment, and refined social status. And a young Japanese noblewoman preparing for her wedding would sit for hours while an attendant carefully painted this dark solution across each individual tooth using a small brush, and the resulting black smile, which might look shocking or unsettling to modern eyes, was considered at the time to be the very height of beauty and sophistication. And travel further west into ancient Persia and the later Ottoman Empire, and you find yet another sophisticated tradition of oral hygiene closely tied to religious practice, much like the Islamic miswak tradition mentioned earlier. And wealthy Persian households developed elaborate silver and ivory dental toolkits, including small, delicate picks for removing food particles, and soft cloths infused with rosewater for polishing the teeth after meals. And Ottoman court physicians wrote detailed medical texts describing the ideal frequency and method of tooth cleaning, recommending gentle circular motions and warning against overly abrasive substances that could damage the enamel, showing a surprisingly modern level of dental understanding centuries before Western dentistry caught up. And now let your mind drift once more toward the subject of small animals used as medicine, because just as with dental care, nearly every ancient culture across the globe developed its own version of this practice, completely independent of the others. And in traditional West African medicine, various insects, including termites and locusts, were both eaten as food and used specifically in healing preparations. And termite mounds themselves were considered to have medicinal properties, and traditional healers in certain regions would grind portions of termite mound clay mixed with specific herbs into a paste applied to wounds, believing the mineral-rich clay would draw out infection and promote healing. And locusts, during times of swarm, were harvested in massive quantities, and while primarily eaten as a valuable source of protein, certain traditional healers also prepared locust-based remedies believed to restore strength and vitality to weakened or ill patients. And across the Atlantic, in the traditional medicine practiced by various Native American nations, small animals held both practical and deeply spiritual significance. And among certain plains nations, the fat and organs of small animals, such as prairie Dogs and gophers were rendered down and used as a soothing salve applied to wounds, burns, and skin irritations, and healers among various nations also used the shed skin of snakes ground into a fine powder and mixed into remedies believed to treat skin conditions, and rheumatism, believing that the snake's own natural ability to shed and renew its skin could be transferred symbolically and physically to a suffering patient. And traditional Chinese medicine, which developed over thousands of years independently from both European and African traditions, eventually cataloged what became known as the 5 poisons, a group of creatures, including the scorpion, the centipede, the snake, the toad, and the spider, each believed, when prepared correctly by a trained practitioner, to hold specific medicinal properties. Despite their obviously dangerous nature, and dried and carefully processed scorpion's ground into a fine powder were prescribed in traditional Chinese medicine to treat convulsions and certain types of chronic pain, and dried centipedes were similarly used in small, carefully measured doses believed to help with numbness and paralysis. And this practice continued for centuries, passed down through generations of practitioners who trained for years to understand the precise preparation methods required to make these dangerous creatures safe enough to consume in medicinal doses. And now let us turn one final time to the subject of snakes, because just as with teeth in medicine, the reverence for these creatures appears again and again across cultures that never had any contact with one another, and in West Africa, particularly in the historical kingdom of Wida, located in what is now the country of Benin. An entire religious tradition developed around the worship of the python, and a great temple was built specifically to house sacred pythons, which were allowed to roam freely, both within the temple grounds and occasionally even through the surrounding town, and killing one of these sacred pythons was considered an extremely serious offense. And if a python was accidentally killed, the person responsible was required to perform an elaborate ceremony of atonement and give the snake a formal funeral, complete with mourning rituals similar to those performed for a deceased human being. And this tradition of python worship in the region was so deeply embedded that when the transatlantic slave trade forcibly brought people from this region to the Americas, they carried elements of this snake reverence with them, and it eventually blended with other spiritual traditions to become part of the broader practice known as Vodou, which continues to hold spiritual significance for many people to this day. And in the Aztec world, far across the ocean, the feathered serpent deity known as Quetzalcoatl held one of the most important positions in the entire pantheon, representing wisdom, the wind, and the very origins of human civilization. According to Aztec mythology, and enormous stone temples were constructed, specifically adorned with carved serpent imagery. And the feathered serpent was believed to move between the realms of earth and sky, serving as a bridge between the human world and the divine. And in Japan, a somewhat different serpent deity known as Ugujin was worshipped particularly in association with agriculture and prosperity. And this deity was often depicted as a coiled snake with a human head, and small shrines dedicated to snake worship can still be found scattered throughout rural Japan today, where local farmers historically believed that respecting the snake spirits living within their fields would ensure a successful harvest. And finally, in Chinese folklore, one of the most beloved and enduring stories passed down for over 1,000 years is the legend of the white snake, in which a snake spirit transforms into a beautiful woman and falls deeply in love with a human man. And this story has been retold countless times through opera literature and eventually film, and it reflects a cultural view of the snake, not as a purely fearsome creature, but as a being capable of loyalty, love, and profound transformation. And if you now step back and consider everything you have heard tonight, the frayed twigs and bitter salted pastes used to clean teeth in the pale light of dawn, the small animals carefully prepared by trusted healers and fed to sick children with complete faith in their power to cure, and the snakes quietly tolerated and even worshipped within the walls of homes and temples across nearly every inhabited continent on Earth. you begin to understand that human beings throughout history, whether living in the deserts of Egypt, the cold fjords of Scandinavia, the dense forests of West Africa, or the mountain valleys of ancient Mexico, were all fundamentally engaged in the exact same quiet daily struggle, which was the struggle to stay healthy, to protect their families, and to make sense of an unpredictable and often frightening world using only the knowledge, tools, and traditions available to them in their particular corner of history. And none of these people saw their own habits as strange or unsettling, because to them, these were simply the ordinary rhythms of daily life, passed down carefully from parent to child for so many generations that no one could quite remember when or how they had first begun. And so tonight, as you lie here safe and warm in your own bed with modern medicine and modern comfort so easily within reach, let these ancient voices and ancient rituals settle quietly into the background of your mind like distant echoes carried on the wind, and let your body continue to sink deeper and deeper into stillness. And let every muscle slowly loosen and release its tension one by one, starting from your forehead and moving slowly down through your jaw, your shoulders, your arms, your chest, and all the way down to your feet. And there is nothing left for you to think about tonight. Nothing left for you to solve or worry over, because the only task remaining for you now is the simple and gentle task of falling asleep, just as countless generations before you eventually did each and every night, wrapped in the quiet, strange, and deeply human rituals of their own particular moment in time. And now let the silence deepen around you completely, and let your breathing grow slow and even, and let sleep finally and fully arrive. And now let us slow down even further and step directly inside a handful of these ancient moments, living them in far greater detail. Because sometimes the best way to drift toward sleep is not simply to hear facts, but to quietly imagine yourself standing inside a single scene for a long, unhurried stretch of time. And so picture yourself first in the city of Rome nearly 2,000 years ago, inside the home of a moderately wealthy merchant named Marcus, who has just woken before sunrise, because today he must appear before an important business partner and secure a contract that will support his family for the coming year. And Marcus rises from his simple wooden bed frame strung with rope and reaches for a small clay jar sitting on a low table beside the door, and this jar contains urine collected the previous evening by his household slave. And Marcus dips a soft strip of linen cloth into the jar and begins working it carefully across his front teeth, feeling the sharp ammonia scent rise into his nose as he scrubs. And he does this every single morning without complaint, because he has done it since he was a small child, watching his own father perform the exact same ritual. And to Marcus, there is nothing strange about this at all. It is simply what a respectable Roman man does to present himself properly before stepping out into public life. And once his teeth feel sufficiently clean, he rinses his mouth with plain water from a stone basin and calls for his toga to be arranged. And as he walks through the crowded streets toward the forum later that morning, he passes several large public vessels positioned on street corners specifically for the collection of urine, and he sees other men pausing briefly to relieve themselves into these vessels, knowing that later today a merchant will come to collect the contents and sell it onward for exactly the same purpose Marcus used it for that very morning. And this quiet, unremarkable transaction happening on street corners throughout the city represents an entire invisible economy built around a substance that modern people would find almost unimaginable to associate with personal hygiene. And yet for Marcus and millions of Romans like him across many centuries, this was simply Tuesday. And now let your imagination drift instead to ancient Egypt, roughly 1,000 years earlier, and picture a young priest named Senmut preparing for an important temple ritual dedicated to the protective cobra goddess Wajet. And Senmut has trained for years to earn the honor of caring for the small number of sacred snakes kept within the temple grounds. And tonight there is a ceremony during which these snakes will be gently placed in specific locations